Imagine a world where the most dangerous people on Earth aren't fighting for money, drugs, or land, but for vengeance. What happens when the most feared mafia boss in Asia, a man who slaughters anyone who harms a woman, collides with Africa's deadliest underground queen? A woman who trained herself to absolute lethality to rewrite the rules of a broken society? If they fight, the world burns. If they unite, they rule it. Before we dive into the dark underworld of these two giants, make sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a comment below on who you think would win in a face-off. You won't want to miss a single second of this journey. Also, tell us where you are watching from so we greet you in our next video. Today's greetings going to Maria from London. You're loved and appreciated. I hope you are enjoying your time here. In the chaotic, sun-baked sprawl of Lagos, Nigeria, power wasn't given. It was seized from the grip of men who thought they owned the world. Amara Obi learned this before she could even walk. Growing up, her childhood soundtrack wasn't music, was the shattering of plates and the muffled cries of her mother being beaten by her father, while village elders simply told her to endure for the sake of marriage. As Amara grew older, the cage only tightened. When she graduated at the top of her class, brilliant and ambitious, she was met with a sickening reality. Corporate doors only opened if she had a male sponsor, a polite term for trading her body for a job. Something inside Amara didn't just break, it hardened into diamond. She walked away from the legitimate world and plunged into the shadows. Amara subjected herself to a brutal, agonizing regime of underground combat, training past the point of human exhaustion until her fists carried the weight of a sledgehammer. She built the Jagaban Sisterhood, an all-female syndicate that weaponized cyber smuggling and black market trade across West Africa. For Amara, the objective was singular: become so terrifyingly powerful that no man could ever tell a woman no again. Any woman fleeing abuse found absolute, heavily armed sanctuary under her wings. And any man who tried to drag a woman back, he simply vanished into the Atlantic. 6,000 miles away, amidst the rain-slicked neon labyrinths of Seoul, South Korea, reigned a different kind of monster: Kang Min-hyuk, the supreme leader of the Black Crane Syndicate, controlled the high-stakes illegal gambling and tech smuggling trade of the entire Asian continent. Min-hyuk was a vision of lethal elegance, impeccably tailored, cold-eyed, and utterly ruthless. But the underworld knew his absolute unwritten law. If Min-hyuk witnessed a man disrespecting or harming a woman, all business stopped. It didn't matter if it was a high-ranking politician or a low-level thug. Min-hyuk would personally step out of his armored limousine and hand out a bone-shattering, generational beating. This deep-seated rage came from a childhood spent watching his mother physically and mentally harassed by his powerful, corrupt father. The moment Min-hyuk grew strong enough, he brutally overthrew his father, took his mother to a heavily fortified penthouse, and vowed to treat every woman he crossed as someone to be fiercely protected. He ran a multi-billion-dollar criminal empire with iron fists, yet to the women trapped in the dark corners of Asia, he was an invisible, terrifying guardian angel. Two unstoppable forces, completely unaware of each other, ruling two different sides of the globe with the exact same burning ideology. But an empire can only grow so large before it hits a border. What happens when a multi-million-dollar international heist forces the Black Crane Syndicate and the Jagaban Sisterhood into the exact same room in Macau? When the unstoppable force meets the immovable object, will they tear the global underworld apart in a bloody war, or will they recognize the fiercely familiar fire burning in each other's eyes? In West Africa, power had always worn a heavy, masculine crown, but beneath the canopy of towering Iroko trees and the humid, chaotic rhythm of Lagos, a quiet revolution had taken root. The Jagaban Sisterhood did not begin with a loud declaration of war. It began like the morning mist over the Lagos lagoon, silent, pervasive, and impossible to hold back. For the women who walked the bustling open-air markets of Balogun or the sleek corporate halls of Victoria Island, the sisterhood had become a myth turned flesh. To them, the sisterhood felt like breathing room in a suffocating world. For decades, a woman's destiny in the region was dictated by traditional patriarchs or corrupt officials. Today, they whispered Amara Obi's name like a prayer. The sisterhood had achieved what decades of bureaucratic policy could not: a parallel state of absolute security. In remote villages where young girls were routinely traded into forced marriages to settle familial debts, tactical teams of the sisterhood would descend under the cover of night. Extraction teams moving with military precision to whisk the girls away to fortified boarding sanctuaries. Yet their most sophisticated battlegrounds were not the rural villages, but the gleaming glass towers of the Nigerian government infrastructure. In a notable incident that solidified their legendary status, 3 brilliant female engineers applied for high-level regulatory roles within the federal energy sector. The director of the department explicitly demanded compromise in exchange for their signatures, a normalized practice that had gatekeepered women for generations. The women reached out to the sisterhood through an encrypted digital network. Amara did not simply threaten the director. 2 nights later, as the official left a luxury lounge in Abuja, his vehicle was gently boxed in by 3 armored SUVs. Amara herself stepped out, tapped on his window with the barrel of a chrome-plated weapon, and handed him a pristine file containing his entire offshore financial history. "You will hire them on merit," Amara whispered, her voice like crushed velvet. "You will pay them standard federal wages, and if you so much as look at them sideways, your family will inherit a very empty grave." The women were hired the following Monday. They faced no harassment, and their careers flourished under an invisible, heavily armed umbrella. This rapid expansion, however, came with staggering risks. The sisterhood was locked in a perpetual dance with the state. The Nigerian government viewed them as a massive threat to sovereign authority. Rogue militant faction that defied the rule of law. The military repeatedly tried to raid their strongholds, but the government faced a unique paradox. The sisterhood had infiltrated the very fabric of society. The wives, daughters, and secretaries of the politicians themselves were secretly leaking intel to Amara. The state could not crush the sisterhood without tearing itself apart from the inside. Across the globe, where the Pacific air turned crisp and the skyscrapers of Gangnam pierced the heavy cloud cover, the Black Crane Syndicate operated with a very different kind of poetry. If Amara's empire was a roaring fire, Kang Min-hyuk's was a block of black ice, smooth, flawless, and freezing to the touch. The Asian underworld understood that Min-hyuk ran a multi-billion-dollar machine. His tech smuggling operations fueled the black markets of Tokyo, Macau, and Singapore, while his elite underground casinos hosted the wealthiest oligarchs in the hemisphere. The South Korean authorities knew exactly who he was, but they feared him too much to act. Min-hyuk possessed digital leverage over the entire National Assembly. One word from him could collapse the country's ruling political party. The police stayed in their precincts, and the politicians kept their eyes on their desks. But inside this empire of vice lay a strange, glittering paradox. The women of Seoul's nightlife, the hostesses, the bartenders, the college students navigating the dangerous predatory currents of wealthy elites viewed Min-hyuk as an urban myth of salvation. A definitive moment occurred at Club Eclipse, an exclusive multi-level underground lounge in Itaewon owned by the syndicate. A group of heavily intoxicated, wealthy young men, the sons of prominent corporate chaebol executives, had cornered two young women in a VIP alcove. When the women refused to leave the club with them, the men grew aggressive, grabbing them by the wrists and hurling vile insults, confident that their family status made them untouchable. The music suddenly cut to absolute silence. The crowd parted as Min-hyuk descended the glass staircase, his dark trench coat billowing slightly, his face an unreadable mask of stone. The chaebol heirs puffed out their chests, threatening to have the venue shut down. Min-hyuk didn't say a word. He slowly removed his watch, handed it to his lieutenant, and moved with a terrifying, fluid velocity. Within 90 seconds, the VIP lounge was smeared with the arrogance of the elite. Min-hyuk broke the ringleader's arm with a single, precise twist and dropped the others onto the marble floor with devastating, calculated strikes. The women watched in hysterical shock, trembling not from fear of Min-hyuk, but from the sheer, overwhelming realization that someone had actually fought for them. Min-hyuk knelt, picked up one of the women's fallen high heels, gently placed it back on her foot, and looked up into her tear-filled eyes. "You are safe in my house," Min-hyuk said quietly, his voice cutting through the stunned silence of the club. "My men will escort you home. If these boys ever look at you again, they will cease to exist. Two empires, separated by oceans and cultures, running identical philosophies through the dark underbelly of the world." They were moving on parallel tracks of absolute power, completely unaware that their global operations were rapidly expanding toward a singular, explosive intersection point. The stage was set, the borders were shrinking, and the global underworld was about to hold its breath. The Grand Archon Premium Port in Macau was swallowed by a thick, salty fog. It was 3 a.m., the golden hour for high-stakes underworld distribution. Tonight, the prize was an illicit shipment of military-grade, untraceable cyber-hacking microchips, a multi-million-dollar haul that both the Black Crane Syndicate and the Jagaban Sisterhood had secretly bought from the same double-crossing European broker. The stage was set for a bloodbath. On the eastern side of the concrete pier stood the Cranes, 40 of the most lethal, highly trained male assassins in Asia stood in absolute uniform silence. They wore matching, razor-sharp black suits, silk ties, and carried concealed submachine guns. At their head was Kang Min-hyuk, looking like a dark god of the underworld, his long wool coat drifting in the sea breeze as he calmly checked his platinum watch. On the western side stood the Sisterhood. 35 of West Africa's most formidable female operators stood in a loose, confident formation. They wore custom-tailored anchor-a-print combat gear, heavy leather jackets, and carried tactical assault rifles. At their front stood Amara Obi, chewing a piece of gum, her arms crossed over her chest, radiating an energy that could destabilize a small nation. "Mr. Kang?" Amara's voice cut through the fog, rich, smooth, and echoing off the shipping containers. "I believe you are standing on my cargo zone. Move your boys before things get expensive for your health insurance." Min-hyuk narrowed his eyes, his voice dropping into a dangerous, gravelly purr. "Ms. Obi, the Cranes do not retreat, especially not from guests. Leave the chips, take your harbor boats, and I will pretend I never saw your face." Amara smirked, spitting out her gum. "Girls, teach these corporate boys some manners." "Charge," roared Min-hyuk's lead lieutenant, a towering, scar-faced enforcer named Jae-sung. He drew a titanium combat baton, sprinting toward the Sisterhood with a terrifying battle cry. From the sisterhood's ranks, a fierce 6-foot-tall Nigerian lieutenant named Fonmi stepped forward, swinging a heavy tire iron with absolute ferocity. Jae-sung raised his baton to strike, and then he looked at her, really looked at her. A woman. Holy Han River, Jae-sung's brain short-circuited. It's a woman. Images of Min-hyuk's absolute rule flashed before his eyes. If a man raises a hand to a woman, he gets a one-way ticket to the bottom of the Han River. Jae-sung envisioned himself stuffed into a concrete barrel, drowning while his boss calmly adjusted his cuffs. Panicking mid-stride, Jae-sung completely froze. He dropped his weapon, threw his hands in the air, and squeaked, "I surrender to the matriarchy." Weck. Funmi didn't care about his existential crises. She swung the tire iron, catching Jae-sung squarely in the ribs, followed by a swift, devastating kick to his shin. Jae-sung collapsed onto the concrete, weeping, not from the pain, but from the sheer terror of his own boss's code. "Don't hit back! Don't hit back!" he screamed to his men. "If you touch her, the boss will skin us alive." What followed was the most humiliating, deeply confusing riot in the history of global organized crime. 35 fierce Nigerian women systematically advanced, throwing haymakers, swinging heavy wrenches, slapping faces, and pulling custom-tailored lapels. On the other side, 40 elite Asian Mafia assassins men who had overthrown governments were actively running away, tripping over shipping pallets and screaming in sheer panic. "Ah, she's coming for me, protect my face," yelled a crane sniper, shielding his head as a sisterhood operative repeatedly smacked him with a heavy leather purse stuffed with spare ammunition. "Do not strike, just block. Just block with your elbows," another lieutenant screamed, running in circles, while two women chased him with tasers. One crane assassin tried to gently push a woman away to keep from being trampled, and his own comrade immediately punched him in the face. "Are you crazy, Min-ho? You almost touched her arm. Do you want the boss to kill us?" Amara stood in the center of the chaos, her jaw practically dropping to the floor. She had trained her women to fight to the death against the brutal, arrogant men of the world. She expected a hail of bullets, ruthless martial arts, and tactical warfare. Instead, she was watching an army of male models aggressively hiding behind boxes and crying whenever a woman walked past them. She turned her gaze to Min-hyuk. The feared Asian king was standing perfectly still, his eyes wide, watching his top enforcers get utterly dominated by slaps and heavy handbags. His face twitching in a rare mixture of absolute bewilderment and deep psychological distress. Hold your fire," Min-hyuk finally roared, his voice cracking slightly in sheer frustration. "Retreat! Back to the vehicles! Do not touch them! Stand down, girls! Stand down!" Amara shouted, wiping a tear of pure hysterical laughter from her eye. "Stop beating them. They're already crying." 10 minutes later, the harbormaster's VIP office was converted into an emergency negotiation room. The air was thick with the scent of cheap air freshener, sea salt, and intense tension. Min-hyuk sat on one side of a cheap plastic table, his posture immaculately straight, though his hands were trembling slightly from pure, unadulterated confusion. Behind him stood Jae-sung, holding an ice pack to his swollen jaw and whimpering quietly. Amara sat opposite him, leaning back in her chair, her combat boots propped up on the table, a thoroughly amused grin plastered across her face. "So," Amara started, leaning forward, her eyes scanning Min-hyuk's sharp, handsome features. "The Great Black Crane Syndicate, the monsters of Asia. Your men fight like frightened toddlers at a daycare. Tell me, Mr. Kang, did I accidentally raid a gentleman's finishing school?" Min-hyuk adjusted his silk tie, clearing his throat, desperately trying to regain his lethal dignity. My men are elite assassins, Miss Obi. They have liquidated rival cartels in under 3 minutes. Clearly, Amara chuckled. I saw how tactically that one boy hid inside a plastic trash can when Funmi looked at him. They acted under my direct, absolute orders, Min-hyuk snapped, his eyes flashing with a sudden, dangerous intensity that made the room temperature drop. My syndicate operates on a holy decree. We do not engage, strike, or harm women, ever, under any circumstance. The man who breaks that rule in my territory does not survive the night. The amusement vanished from Amara's face. She blinked, her posture straightening. She looked closely at him, searching for a lie, for sarcasm, for a tactical trick. But all she saw in his dark, intense eyes was a burning, fiercely familiar conviction. You don't hurt women? Amara asked, her voice dropping its mocking tone, becoming quiet, grounded. Never, Min-hyuk said softly, his gaze locked onto hers. They are to be protected. The world treats them with enough malice. My empire will not add to it. Amara stared at him, a sudden, powerful jolt running straight down her spine. For her entire life, every powerful man she had ever encountered was a predator, a bully, or a tyrant who viewed women as property or obstacles. Yet here sat the most feared mafia boss in Asia, surrounded by bruised men, defending his absolute refusal to lay a finger on her soldiers. Oh no, Amara thought, her heart doing a sudden, violent flip against her ribs. He's not a fragile man at all. He's magnificent. Min-hyuk, looking at the fierce, beautiful queen sitting across from him, a woman who had built an army just to keep her sisters safe, felt his own heart hammer against his ribs. The dangerous, icy interior of his soul suddenly felt like it was melting under a warm Lagos sun. It seems, Min-hyuk whispered, a slow, incredibly rare smile breaking across his handsome face. We have a slight operational overlap, Miss Obi. It seems we do, Mr. Kang, Amara said, her voice dripping with a new, dangerous warmth as she slowly lowered her boots from the table. So, how about we split the microchips and you tell me over dinner why an Asian king cares so much about the safety of my girls? In the dimly lit harbor master's office, the silence that followed Min-hyuk's response was louder than the riot on the pier. Amara sat with her hand half extended, her proposition hanging in the humid air like a physical object. Min-hyuk looked at her smooth, dark skin, the fierce intelligence radiating from her eyes, and the sheer power in her posture. His heart screamed at him to accept, to sit across a candlelit table from this goddess and trace the history of her scars. But the deep-seated, hyper-vigilant mafia instincts that had kept him alive for decades suddenly flared up. This is a trap, his subconscious whispered. A woman this powerful doesn't offer peace unless it's a tactical maneuver to lower your guard. No, Min-hyuk said. His voice was flat, cutting, and entirely devoid of the warmth that had begun to creep into it moments before. We will not split the microchips. You may take the entire shipment, Ms. Obi. Consider it a tribute to your sisterhood. And as for dinner, my schedule does not permit social engagements with rival organizations. Amara froze. Her hand remained mid-air for 3 agonizing seconds before she slowly curled her fingers back into a fist. In the background, Funmi's jaw literally dropped, and she exchanged a horrified, bewildered look with another sisterhood lieutenant. Nobody ever walked away from Amara Obi. Nobody surrendered millions of dollars in black market tech just to avoid a fight with her, and absolutely no man had ever looked her in the eye and rejected a dinner invitation. For a fraction of a second, Amara's supreme confidence fractured, revealing a profound, deeply buried shock. Min-hyuk stood up, buttoned his tailored suit jacket, and bowed with flawless, icy etiquette. "Safe travels back to Lagos, Miss Obi." He turned and strode out of the room, his long coat billowing like a shadow. Behind him, Jae-sung, still clutching his ice pack, scrambled to keep up, whispering frantically, "Boss, we just gave away $40 million. Boss, wait, are we poor now?" The private jet ride back to Nigeria was deafeningly quiet. The interior of the customized Boeing 777 was usually filled with the triumphant laughter of the sisterhood. But tonight, the 35 women sat in stunned, analytical silence. Amara sat in the master's suite at the front of the plane, staring blankly out the window at the endless expanse of clouds. "Amara," Fenmi said, stepping into the cabin gently holding a glass of hibiscus tea. "The girls are confused. The local enforcers in Lagos are calling. They want to know how we won the Macau haul without firing a single bullet. They think we used voodoo." "We didn't use anything," Amara said, her voice unusually distant. "He just gave it to us." "A man giving up power? A mafia boss giving up $40 million just to keep his boys from hitting us?" Fenmi shook her head, her face a mask of deep suspicion. "It's a scam, Oga. He's planning something. He probably tracked the chips. He wants to find our main sanctuary." "Maybe," Amara murmured. But as Funmi left the room, Amara sank deeper into her leather seat. For the next 3 days, back in her heavily fortified compound in Lekki, Amara was a ghost. She tried to focus on the cyber-smuggling spreadsheets, but every time she closed her eyes, Min-hyuk's face materialized in the dark. She remembered the sharp, aristocratic line of his jaw, the way his dark eyes had flashed with genuine fury when he spoke about protecting women, and the ridiculous, breathtaking sight of him gently putting a high heel back onto a crying club hostess's foot. She found herself staring at the ceiling at 2 a.m., fantasizing. What would it look like, she thought, a forbidden smile tugging at her lips. An empire where the Crane and the sisterhood stood side by side. A global fortress where no woman could ever be touched. Guarded by his shadow and her iron. A love that wasn't a transaction or a compromise, but a collision of two gods. "No!" Amara snapped out loud, violently slamming her fist onto her mahogany desk, shattering a porcelain teacup. She stood up, breathing heavily, her eyes wide with self-directed anger. "Get a grip, Amara. What is wrong with you? This is weakness. This is delusional. There is no real man in this world with that mentality. He is a criminal actor. He played a part to confuse you, and it's working. Lock it down." Meanwhile, in the ultra-modern penthouse high above the glittering lights of Gangnam, Kang Min-hyuk was rapidly losing his mind. He had completely abandoned his usual routine. The paperwork for his illegal gambling dens sat untouched. Instead, the multi-billionaire mafia king was pacing back and forth across his Italian marble floor, his tie discarded, his hair uncharacteristically messy. Jae-sung stood by the door, watching his boss with immense concern. "Boss, you've been pacing for 48 hours. You haven't even yelled at the politicians today. The mayor called 3 times. He thinks you're dead." "She threw a 200-pound marble lion, Jae-sung," Min-hyuk said, stopping abruptly, his eyes wide and manic. "Yes, boss, she almost crushed Mr. Chang. It was very vibrant." "She didn't just throw it," Min-hyuk whispered. stepping closer to his lieutenant, his voice filled with an almost terrifying awe. She threw it with purpose. Did you see her eyes? She wanted to tear the world apart for that secretary. She is a force of nature. She is my kind of woman. If I have her, Jae-sung. If we combine the Crane and the Sisterhood, we wouldn't just rule Asia and Africa. We would rewrite the laws of the global underworld. Min-hyuk turned back to the window, his mind exploding with cinematic fantasies. He imagined bringing her to Seoul, introducing her to his mother, watching the two most important women in his life share a meal in a garden that no man could ever threaten. He imagined standing beside her on the deck of an international vessel, their combined armies standing in flawless formation. A unified wall of iron and silk, showing the world what happens when true power protects the vulnerable. He could feel the warmth of her hand in his, a fierce, burning love that didn't diminish his strength, but doubled it. Then his face went completely cold. Min-hyuk walked over to his wet bar, poured a glass of neat whiskey, and drank it in one aggressive gulp. He slammed the glass down, his reflection in the mirror showing a man fighting his own soul. "Stop it," Min-hyuk muttered to himself, his voice dropping into a dark, defensive growl. "It's a scam. A beautiful, deadly West African scam. You are a mafia boss, not a character in a romance novel." Women like Amara Obi do not build empires just to hold hands with a Korean gangster. She would cut your throat the moment you fell asleep. Do not fall for it. Focus on the business. Two monarchs, thousands of miles apart, staring into the night, both fiercely convinced that the other was the most beautiful trap they had ever encountered. The human mind is an efficient machine until it is infected by an impossibility. For Amara Obi, the impossibility wore a bespoke charcoal suit and spoke in a low, gravelly timbre that haunted her security briefings. In the weeks following the Macau anomaly, the Jagaban sanctuary in Lecce became a pressure cooker of unexpressed tension. Amara had increased the tactical training hours for her enforcers from 4 hours a day to 8. She was running 3 miles extra every morning along the humid coastline, her combat boots kicking up wet sand as she tried to outrun the phantom memory of Min-hyuk's eyes. "You're pushing the girls too hard, Oga," Funmi said one evening, leaning against the doorframe of the compound's underground shooting range. The air smelled heavily of cordite and spent brass. "We spent 3 hours today practicing defensive shield formations against an imaginary enemy that doesn't use weapons. We all know who you're preparing for. And we all know he isn't coming." Amara didn't stop firing. Bang, bang, bang. The paper target 50 meters away had its center completely obliterated. She dropped the empty magazine, her breath rattling in her chest, her dark skin glistening with sweat under the harsh fluorescent lights. "He is a variable we cannot calculate, Funmi," Amara said, her voice tight, almost defensive. "A mafia king who gives away $40 million in microchips without a fight is either a fool or a strategist who is playing a game so long we can't see the board yet. I do not believe in male saints. The world does not produce them." "And if he isn't playing a game?" Funmi asked softly, stepping closer. "What if he looked at you and saw exactly what we see? A woman who shouldn't have to fight the whole world alone?" Amara turned her head sharply, her gaze cutting like a blade. "That is the most dangerous thought you have ever spoken in this house. A woman in our position cannot afford a savior. The moment I believe a man can protect me, I give him the coordinates to my execution." She stormed out of the range, leaving the weapon on the counter. But back in her private quarters, surrounded by monitors displaying the live feeds of 45 safe houses across West Africa, the silence returned to mock her. She sat on the edge of her bed, her hands buried in her face. The reality of her life was a dark, unyielding truth. She was the shield for thousands of voiceless women. If she softened, if she allowed herself to believe in the beautiful fantasy of a partner who shared her burden, the shield would crack. The fear wasn't that Min-hyuk was her enemy. The true terror was that she desperately wanted him to be her equal. In Seoul, the Han River had begun to carry shards of winter ice, reflecting the jagged neon architecture of the city like broken glass. Inside the penthouse of the Black Crane Syndicate, the temperature felt exactly the same. Kang Min-hyuk was sitting in his leather armchair, the lights turned off, staring at a small digital tablet on his lap. The screen displayed a single, high-resolution surveillance photograph taken from a port camera in Macau, Amara, standing amidst the drywall dust, her Ankara cape catching the wind, looking like a revolutionary deity. He had checked the microchip shipment tracking data every single day. The Sisterhood had successfully integrated the tech into their West African communications network, rendering their safe houses completely invisible to government satellites. He had given them the tools to become invincible, and it had cost him nothing but his peace of mind. "Boss," Jae-sung said, entering the room quietly without turning on the lights. He knew better than to disturb Min-hyuk's recent dark moods. "The elders from the Singapore branch are getting restless. They want to know why we haven't retaliated against the African syndicate for the loss of the Macau port territory. They are calling it a sign of weakness." Min-hyuk didn't move his gaze from the screen. "Tell the Singapore elders that if they wish to challenge my judgment, they are welcome to fly to Seoul and discuss it with me, personally." Jae-sung swallowed hard. "I will tell them they are very happy with your decision, boss." He paused, hesitating by the door. "Boss, the security team noticed you have altered the patrol routes around your mother's estate. You added 12 more men. Is there a threat?" "The threat is internal," Jae-sung, Min-hyuk said, his voice dropping into that quiet, terrifying register that meant he was fighting his own demons. "Go." When the door clicked shut, Min-hyuk closed the tablet and let his head fall back against the leather. The dark reality of his existence was an iron cage he had built with his own hands. He was the supreme predator of the Asian underworld because he allowed no vulnerabilities. Love, attachment, romance. These were the luxuries of ordinary citizens who didn't have 30 rival syndicates waiting for a single moment of hesitation. If he pursued Amara, he wouldn't just be entering a relationship. He would be dragging the deadliest woman in Africa into the crosshairs of every assassin in the Eastern Hemisphere. He was running crazy with the desire to see her, to hear that rich, mocking laugh again, to find out if the woman beneath the armor was as warm as the Lagos sun. But the memory of his mother's blood on the kitchen floor when he was a boy reminded him of the absolute rule of the dark world. Power protects by standing alone. "She is a myth," Min-hyuk whispered into the empty, freezing room, his jaw tightening until the bone ached. "A beautiful, impossible trick of the mind. Forget her." Neither of them knew that the underworld had its own gravity. While the two monarchs spent their nights trying to systematically erase each other from their thoughts, the global market was already reacting to the vacuum left by their standoff.
A new,
vicious consortium of human traffickersmen who specialized in exploitation across the borders of the Middle East and Eastern Europe had noticed the strange, protective bubbles growing over Asia and Africa. They realized that to expand their operations, they would have to pop either the Crane or the Sisterhood. The dark reality was closing in on both empires, preparing a crucible that would force them out of their isolation and straight back into the ring together. The global underworld did not tolerate a vacuum, nor did it tolerate mercy. For months, the Black Crane Syndicate and the Jagaban Sisterhood had carved out territories of absolute safety for women, inadvertently creating a massive financial deficit for the most vicious enterprise on Earth, the Vulture Consortium. Operating out of lawless ports in Eastern Europe and expanding rapidly through the Middle East, the Vultures were a ruthless cartel of human traffickers, led by a sadistic oligarch known only as the Director. The Vultures didn't care about honor. The Director decided on a permanent solution: eliminate both monarchs, dismantle their empires, and reopen the global pipeline of exploitation. They quietly amassed an army of heavily armed mercenaries, purchasing military-grade drones and black-market explosives, preparing a synchronized blitzkrieg to wipe the Cranes and the Sisterhood off the map. Min-hyuk discovered the threat first. Deep within the encrypted servers of his tech smuggling network, his hackers intercepted a highly classified digital manifest. It contained satellite coordinates for his mother's fortified penthouse in Seoul, alongside a matching set of coordinates for Amara's main Lekki sanctuary in Lagos. The Vultures were planning a simultaneous strike to hit them where it hurt most. Min-hyuk didn't hesitate. The cold, calculated restraint he had practiced for weeks evaporated instantly. He couldn't let Amara burn. Using the secure, untraceable microchips he had surrendered to her in Macau, Min-hyuk bypassed all standard protocols and sent a direct, encrypted video transmission straight to Amara's private terminal. When Amara's screen flared to life in the dead of night, she found herself looking at Min-hyuk. He had discarded his usual immaculate posture. His sleeves were rolled up, his eyes intense, radiating a raw, protective urgency. "Ms. Obi," Min-hyuk said, his voice cutting through the speaker like a blade. "We don't have time for negotiations or denials. Check your dark web channels for the term Vulture Consortium. They have acquired military-grade thermobaric weapons. They're targeting my mother, and they are targeting your sanctuaries. They want a global market of blood. We cannot fight this alone." Amara's blood ran cold. She didn't let her emotions show, but her fingers flew across her keyboard. For 3 hours, she launched the Sisterhood's elite cyber intelligence teams into the deep web. What she found confirmed his warning: a massive mercenary fleet was already boarding unmarked cargo ships. Split between the Sea of Japan and the Gulf of Guinea, the Vultures were coming to dismantle everything they had built. "Fund me, pack the tactical gear," Amara ordered, her voice vibrating with a terrifying calm. "We are flying to a neutral zone. The Korean king is right. If we don't lock hands, our sisters die." They met in a secluded, private hangar in Dubai, a neutral ground of glass and steel. There were no petty insults this time, no smirks, and no stolen glances of denial. The threat was too real. "They expect us to defend our homes separately," Min-hyuk explained, laying out a digital holographic map of their global logistics networks. "If we pull our forces back to guard our sanctuaries, they will encircle us and pick us apart." Amara stepped up next to him, her shoulder brushing his, a fierce, brilliant spark lighting up her eyes. "Then we don't defend, Mr. Kang. We bait them. We pretend we know absolutely nothing. We let them think we are vulnerable, soft, and isolated." As they leaned over the holographic map, mapping out tactical choke points, the professional distance they both tried so hard to maintain began to dissolve. The shared adrenaline of the looming war amplified the unspoken tension that had been building since Macau. At one point, their hands brushed against each other over the digital screen. Neither pulled away. Min-hyuk looked up from the data, his dark eyes suddenly soft, entirely stripped of his Mafia armor. If anything happens to you in this fight, Amara. Amara stared back, her heart doing a violent, unpredictable flip. Nothing will happen to me, Min-hyuk. And nothing will happen to you. We are going to survive this. The raw sincerity in his voice broke through her final defenses. For the first time, she didn't see a potential threat or a criminal actor. She saw a man who truly, deeply cared for her safety. The realization sent a wave of electric warmth through her veins. A quiet internal confirmation that the fantasy she had fought against was entirely real. Together, they engineered a lethal trap. They deliberately leaked false intelligence indicating that Min-hyuk was traveling with diminished security to an underground casino in Macau, while Amara was supposedly hosting a vulnerable regional gathering at a coastal estate in Nigeria. The Vultures bit the bait instantly. 3 nights later, the trap snapped shut. The Vulture Consortium launched their coordinated multi-continental attack. In Lagos, a fleet of mercenary gunboats sped toward the coastal estate, weapons primed. In Macau, 3 heavily armed tactical squads stormed the casino, blowing the doors off their hinges with plastic explosives. But they didn't find helpless victims. They found a unified wall of absolute death. The moment the Vultures entered the casino, the lights cut out. Instead of a few bodyguards, they were met by the combined vanguard of the Black Crane Syndicate and the Jagaban Sisterhood. From the shadows, Min-hyuk's elite marksmen opened fire with surgical precision, while Amara's vanguard, led by Fun, descended from the balconies like avenging angels, wielding heavy tactical shotguns and concrete-shattering batons. In Lagos, as the mercenaries breached the shoreline, Min-hyuk's stealth drones, rerouted from Asia, dropped from the clouds, obliterating the enemy gunboats in blinding bursts of fire. Amara herself led the ground sweep, moving with terrifying velocity, her brass knuckles shattering the armor of the Vulture commanders, while Min-hyuk's top enforcers stood flank to flank with her sisters, providing a flawless, interlocking defensive perimeter. It wasn't a battle. It was a global execution of an oppressive regime. The collaboration was flawless. Every time a mercenary tried to flank a Sisterhood operative, a Crane assassin dropped him from behind. Every time a Crane enforcer faced an armored shield, a Sisterhood combatant bypassed it with a heavy explosive charge. Within 2 hours, the Vulture Consortium was entirely wiped from the global ledger. The director's empire was reduced to ash. As the final smoke cleared over the shattered Macau casino lounge, a heavy, triumphant silence returned. The floor was littered with the weapons of their defeated enemies. Min-hyuk and Amara stood side by side in the center of the wreckage, chests heaving, adrenaline still violently coursing through their bodies. They turned to face each other at the exact same moment. The sheer, overwhelming relief of survival, the intoxicating rush of total victory, and weeks of buried, agonizing desire collided in a single fraction of a second. Without a single word, without either of them consciously intending to do it, they moved. Min-hyuk reached out, his hand gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him, while Amara's hand flew to the back of his neck, pulling him down. Their lips met in a fierce, breathless, crashing kiss. It wasn't a calculated tactical move or a polite negotiation. It was a sudden, explosive release of pure, unfiltered passion right in the middle of a war zone. The remaining guards on both sides stood completely frozen in shock. Jae-sung dropped his gun out of sheer bewilderment, and Funmi slowly lowered her shotgun, her mouth wide open as she watched her untouchable, man-hating queen passionately kissing the supreme ruler of Asia amidst the rubble. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, their eyes locked. Min-hyuk's hand stayed firmly on her waist, and Amara's fingers remained tangled in his hair. The realization of what they had just done hit them simultaneously, but the denial was completely gone. The unintentional kiss had shattered the last remaining walls of their isolation. A slow, brilliant smile broke across Amara's face, her eyes shining with absolute certainty. "Well," she whispered, her voice thick with affection and victory, "that is one way to seal a contract." Min-hyuk laughed, a rich, genuine sound that echoed off the ruined walls. His eyes locked onto hers with a fierce devotion. "The only way, my queen. The old world is dead. Right there, standing over the ruins of their enemies, the new empire was born. A global fortress of iron, silk, and absolute love, where the Crane and the Sisterhood stood unified, completely unstoppable." The silence that followed, the explosive, unscripted kiss was thick with the scent of ozone, burnt gunpowder, and a sudden, undeniable shift in human history. They were still standing chest to chest in the center of the shattered Macau lounge. Min-hyuk's hands remained firmly anchored to Amara's waist, feeling the rapid, rhythmic rise and fall of her breath. He didn't let go. He didn't step back. The calculated, hyper-vigilant Mafia boss had completely vanished, leaving only a man who had finally found his match. Looking down into her fierce, beautiful eyes, Min-hyuk took a deep breath, his voice dropping into a low. Amara's heart slammed against her ribs. Her mind, usually a fortress of cold strategy, was suddenly a whirlwind of chaos. "Is this real?" she thought, her eyes scanning every line of his face, searching for a hint of deceit. "A man like him, speaking to me like this?" For her entire life, men had looked at her with fear, lust, or a desire to suppress her. But Min-hyuk looked at her like she was the moon and the stars, yet fiercely recognizing the concrete in her fists. Min-hyuk tightened his grip on her waist, stepping even closer, his eyes locking onto hers with a burning intensity. "If you accept me, I promise you this. I will be the man you never thought existed. I will never ask you to step down, to soften, or to walk in my shadow. We will not merge our kingdoms into something diluted. We will build one colossal, global empire with a single, unshakable objective. You will remain the absolute queen of your realm, and I will rule as the king of mine. Side by side, our iron and silk will encircle this planet. No corrupt patriarch, no tyrant, and no syndicate will ever threaten a woman again without answering to our combined wrath. Accept my hand, Amara. Let us rule the dark together." Around them, the tactical tension completely broke. The remaining soldiers of both empires, still covered in soot and drywall dust, looked at each other. Jae-sung, still nursing his bruised jaw, let out a dramatic, emotional sniffle. "Oh my God, boss, that was so beautiful," Jae-sung blubbered, wiping a tear. He immediately turned to the Sisterhood operatives. "Come on, say yes. Please say yes. I want to go to a wedding." Fenmi stepped forward, her heavy shotgun resting on her shoulder. She looked at Min-hyuk, then at Amara's face, seeing a softness in her leader she hadn't seen in a decade. A massive, triumphant grin broke across Fenmi's face. Oya, accept it. If he talks like this, he is a real one. Accept it." Suddenly, the shattered casino lounge erupted into a chaotic, cheering gallery. 35 elite West African warriors and 40 razor-sharp Asian assassins started chanting in unison, clapping their hands and stomping their boots against the debris-strewn floor. "Yes, accept. Yes, accept." The sheer absurdity of a global mafia alliance being cheered on by heavily armed executioners filled the room with a wild, electric energy. Amara looked around at her sisters, then back up at the Korean king. The final walls around her soul, the defenses built from a childhood of watching women suffer, crumbled completely. She realized she wasn't giving up her power by accepting him. She was multiplying it. A radiant, beautiful laugh broke from her lips, rich and echoing against the ruined pillars. She reached up, her scarred fingers gently wrapping around his tie, pulling him down until their foreheads touched. Kang Min-hyuk, Amara whispered, her eyes shining with pure, dangerous affection. You talk far too much for a gangster, but you have a deal. I accept your hand, your empire, and your heart. Let's show the world how monarchs love. The room exploded into cheers once more as Min-hyuk pulled her into another deep, triumphant kiss, sealing an alliance that changed the global underworld forever. 1 year later, the world was a very different place. The union of the Black Crane Syndicate and the Jagaban Sisterhood was finalized not in a corporate boardroom, but in a sprawling, ultra-luxury fortress constructed on a private island in the Mediterranean, the geographic center of their combined empires. Their wedding had been the event of the century. Min-hyuk's mother, living safely under the protection of a unified global army, had wept tears of pure joy as she watched her son marry the African queen. The celebration had lasted for 3 days, featuring a chaotic but beautiful fusion of traditional Korean delicacies and fiery Nigerian jollof rice, with gang leaders from Tokyo and cyber smugglers from Lagos dancing side by side. Today, the Crimson Crane Alliance rules the shadows with absolute, benevolent authority. They built a multi-billion-dollar global infrastructure dedicated to a singular, holy decree: the total protection and elevation of women. From the smallest rural villages in West Africa to the most exclusive corporate boardrooms in Seoul, the fear of the alliance keeps the wicked in check. A new network of sanctuaries, heavily funded and militarily defended, provides safety, education, and high-level employment to thousands of women worldwide, completely bypassing the corrupt gatekeepers of the old world. On the balcony of their fortress, overlooking the deep blue sea, Min-hyuk stands in a loose silk shirt, holding 2 glasses of champagne. Amara walks out to join him, wearing a stunning Ankara gown that sways in the evening breeze, her brass knuckles resting casually on the outdoor table. Min-hyuk hands her a glass, his eyes filled with the same fierce devotion from the Macau pier. The European transport lines are completely secure. The shelters in the east just received the new satellite communication grid. We won, my queen. Amara smiles, clinking her glass against his, before leaning into his side, feeling the steady, protective warmth of the man who rewrote the world for her. We did, my king, Amara says softly, looking out over the horizon where their empire stretches indefinitely. And the best part? We're just getting started. With the global underworld united under the absolute rule of the Crimson Crane Alliance, peace seems absolute, but true power always attracts a new shadow. Will this unbreakable union hold, or will the weight of their empires crush the love that started it all?